Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going to be looking into something a little different, the Lava Ridge Wind Project in Idaho. Now, you might be thinking, renewable energy, what's the problem? But when you look closer, there are some pretty serious allegations swirling around this project. Stuff that hints at, well, civil rights violations and maybe even the militarization of federal law enforcement.
Yeah, this one's a doozy for sure. And to really grasp the gravity of the situation, we need to consider the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM.
Right, the BLM.
Their history, especially out west, is riddled with tension with local communities. And this Lava Ridge project, it's like poking a hornet's nest.
Absolutely. So to guide us through this deep dive, we've got a few key arguments. First up, we have a report by Eric Parker, who some of you might remember from the 2014 Bundy standoff.
Oh, yeah. That's a name that carries some weight.
It does. And his report raises some serious red flags about Lava Ridge. He's talking about potential for conflict, especially given the BLM's track record. Then we've got the Don't Do IT Act, a proposed bill aiming to shift some power over federal land use back to the states.
That's an interesting one. Definitely speaks to the growing pushback against federal overreach we're seeing.
And last but certainly not least, we've got a memo from Larry Wooten, former lead investigator for the BLM. He's basically blowing the whistle on some alleged misconduct within the agency.
Whistleblowers always got to pay attention when they step forward. A lot of courage there.
No doubt. So let's dive into Eric Parker's report first. He really goes in, outlining a whole laundry list of concerns about Lava Ridge: financial self-dealing, environmental damage, threats to cultural heritage. He's covering it all.
He does seem particularly concerned about the fact that LS Power, the project developer, also owns the transmission line operator.
Right, which raises some eyebrows.
Big time. It creates a pretty glaring conflict of interest, right? You gotta wonder who's really benefiting here. If a lot of this energy is going out of state, Idaho residents are left holding the bag, dealing with the downsides without much to show for it.
And then you factor in Parker's experience at the Bundy standoff. He sees a disturbing pattern of overreach from the BLM, a disregard for local communities.
And with Lava Ridge, he's basically saying, here we go again.
Exactly. It's like this project could be setting the stage for another showdown.
Yeah, the Bundy standoff, that was a watershed moment. It really exposed the deep-seated mistrust between a lot of folks in the West and the BLM, and that distrust is still simmering today.
Which brings us to the Don't Do IT Act. This bill, spearheaded by Senator Risch, it's a direct response to that feeling of being overrun by the feds.
It's like a power grab, but in reverse.
Right. Giving states the power to veto federal land use projects, that's a big shift.
It is, and it shows how strong the sentiment is out there, the feeling that the federal government has overstepped its bounds when it comes to managing these lands.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to Larry Wooten and his memo. This is where things get really interesting and a little unsettling, because he's claiming there was some serious misconduct going on within the BLM, stuff that might even cross the line into civil liberties violations.
Lay it on us.
Well, he's saying the Southern Poverty Law Center, a pretty influential left-leaning group, was pulling strings within the BLM. And he's suggesting that this influence might have led to people being targeted based on their political beliefs, not actual criminal activity.
Whoa, now that's a serious accusation.
It is, and it gets worse. He even hints that the BLM's National Threat Mitigation Unit, get this, might have been used to spy on Idaho residents illegally.
That's crossing a line. If that's true, it raises a lot of questions about how far the government is willing to go to silence dissenting voices.
Right. It's chilling. And if Wooten's allegations hold up, we're talking about an agency potentially operating way outside its mandate, infringing on the rights of American citizens.
And given the already heated climate surrounding Lava Ridge, the opposition brewing, this just throws gasoline on the fire.
One of the most striking things Wooten talks about is this idea of mission creep within the BLM. He's arguing that the agency has strayed so far from its original purpose, expanding its power in ways that were never intended.
Mission creep, yeah, that's a slippery slope with government agencies. They start with a specific goal, then little by little, their scope expands, their power grows, and before you know it, they're doing things that were never part of the plan.
And in the context of Lava Ridge, it's like, if this mission creep is real, is the BLM using its newfound power to squash any opposition to the project?
That's the question, isn't it? If they were willing to push the boundaries before, as Wooten suggests, what's stopping them from doing it again, especially when they're facing pushback like this?
That's a question everyone involved in this needs to be asking. The parallels to the Bundy standoff, they're too clear to ignore. And the stakes here, They couldn't be higher.
It's fascinating, right? We've got a renewable energy project tangled up with allegations of government overreach and a bill that aims to rebalance power between states and the feds. It all boils down to one fundamental question. How do we make sure government agencies are playing by the rules, respecting individual rights, and truly serving the people?
It's a question that deserves our full attention, and we're going to keep digging into it as we dive deeper into this complex and, frankly, disturbing situation.
Because let's face it, the potential for things to escalate, for history to repeat itself, it's very real, and we need to understand what's at stake here.
We'll be back in the next part of our deep dive to examine the potential consequences of unchecked government power, the role of peaceful protest, and how we, as citizens, can protect our freedoms in the face of this kind of pressure. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Lava Ridge Wind Project.
Man, this whole situation, it's like a ticking time bomb, isn't it? We've got environmental concerns, allegations of the government, playing fast and loose with the rules, maybe even stepping on some civil liberties. And then you have a community that's ready to fight back. So where do we go from here? What can we actually do?
It's easy to feel helpless, especially when you're going up against a behemoth like the BLM. But we got to remember, they work for us. We, the people, we have the power. There are ways to hold them accountable, ways to demand change.
Okay, so let's talk about those ways. What can we actually do to push back against this potential overreach and make sure our rights are protected?
Well, one of the most powerful tools is litigation, taking legal action.
Going to court. Yeah, legal challenges can force the BLM to, color inside the lines, follow the law. Groups that are opposed to Lava Ridge, they could challenge the whole approval process, highlight the environmental risks, point out potential violations of, say, the National Historic Preservation Act, or maybe bring up inadequate consultation with the tribes.
So use the legal system to keep the BLM honest, make sure they're playing by the rules and respecting everyone's rights.
Exactly. And if any evidence comes out, about misconduct or civil rights violations, like what Wooten was suggesting, well, then legal action can bring that to light and hold people responsible.
Makes sense. But what about folks who, maybe don't have the resources for a long legal battle?
That's where public pressure comes in.
Right.
Things like media attention, getting the word out there, grassroots organizing, social media campaigns, all that. A strong public outcry. When it's done right, it can really force those in power, especially elected officials, to sit up and listen.
So basically make a lot of noise, get the message out there, and it can actually move the needle.
Absolutely. Politicians, they really care about what people think, especially when elections are coming up. If enough people are pushing back against something, well, it might make them think twice about supporting a project, especially if it's unpopular.
That's good to know. So we're talking about a two-pronged approach here. Legal action to keep the BLM in check, and public pressure to make sure our elected officials are actually representing us.
You got it. It's going to take work on multiple fronts for sure. But the most important thing is to stay engaged. Don't let this issue just fade away. Keep the pressure on, hold those in power accountable, and never stop fighting for your rights.
It's a fight worth having.
Yeah.
And, as we continue this deep dive, it strikes me that Lava Ridge, it's more than just about this one project, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a smaller version of a much bigger struggle happening all across the country. A struggle over what the government's role should be, where the power really lies, and what it truly means to be free in a democracy.
It's a struggle for the soul of America, in a way.
And the outcome depends on all of us, on whether we stay informed, whether we speak up, whether we hold those in power accountable, whether we just give up or we keep pushing for a world that's more fair and just for everyone.
That's what it comes down to.
We can't afford to be silent.
We've got to use our voices.
All right, so we spent the last couple parts really digging into Lava Ridge, and man, it's a mess. Environmental worries, the government may be overstepping its bounds, folks feeling like their rights are on the line, and a whole community ready to push back. So the big question is, what do we do? What can we actually do to make a difference here?
It can feel overwhelming, right? Like David versus Goliath going up against the BLM. But remember, the power ultimately rests with the people. We're not powerless. There are things we can do, real tools we can use to hold those in power accountable and push for change.
So let's talk tools. Give us the rundown. What can we actually do to push back and protect our rights?
One powerful tool is litigation, using the legal system.
Taking them to court, you mean?
Yeah. Legal challenges, they can force the BLM to operate within the law, stay in their lane, Groups opposing Lava Ridge, they could challenge the whole approval process for the project. They could highlight those environmental risks, point out potential violations, like maybe of the National Historic Preservation Act, or maybe even bring up concerns about whether they've properly consulted with tribal nations.
So basically use the courts to make sure the BLM is following the rules, dotting their I's and crossing their T's, respecting everyone's rights.
Right, exactly. And if evidence does come out about misconduct or those civil rights violations, like what Wooten was suggesting, well, legal action can bring all that to light and hopefully, hold the people responsible accountable for their actions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about people who maybe can't afford a long, drawn-out legal battle? What are their options?
Well, that's where public pressure comes in. Media attention, grassroots organizing, social media campaigns, that kind of stuff. When you have a strong public outcry, a lot of people speaking up, he can really get the attention of those in power, especially elected officials.
So making noise, raising awareness, getting the word out there, that can actually make a difference.
It absolutely can. You got to remember, politicians are very sensitive to public opinion, especially when an election's around the corner. When they see a lot of pushback from their constituents, from the people they represent, well, it might make them think twice about supporting a project that's, deeply unpopular.
I like it. So we're talking about a two-pronged approach. Legal challenges to keep the BLM on their toes, and public pressure to make sure our elected officials are actually listening to us, representing the people.
Exactly. It's going to take a concerted effort. We got to hit them from both sides. But the most important thing, I think, is to stay engaged. This can't be a one-and-done thing. Don't let this issue fade away. Keep the pressure on. Hold those in power accountable. And you know what? Never stop fighting for your rights.
It's a fight worth having. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about how Lava Ridge, it's more than just this one project, right? It's like this little microcosm of a much bigger battle that's happening all over the country. This battle over the role of government, who really has the power and what it really means to be free in a democracy.
Yeah, it's about those fundamental values, those big ideas that this country was built on.
What happens next, the outcome of this whole thing, it really depends on us, on whether we stay informed, whether we speak up, whether we hold those in power accountable. It's on us to decide if we give up or if we keep pushing for a better world, a more just world.
That's the challenge and the opportunity that's in front of all of us right now.
We can't afford to stay silent. We can't afford to be apathetic. We got to get involved. We got to make our voices heard. And that's what this deep dive has been all about. Shining a light on what's happening, exposing the truth, and hopefully empowering people to take action.
Because at the end of the day, that's how we protect our freedoms, how we defend our democracy, how we build a better future. By getting involved, by speaking up, by never giving up.
Absolutely. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what's at stake, the tools we have, and why it's so important to stand up for what we believe in. Remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us. We create it. We create it together. Thanks for joining us.